In today's video, we're going to be diving into a very interesting pattern. It's warm right now, even stormy for some areas. Thunderstorms and heavy showers. We caught some of that on the vlog that's going to be coming out soon. By the way, the vlog channel on the top right corner of your screen, for those of you curious about it, it is kind of weather related. I'm also starting my garden a little bit, starting some seeds, so that's what we're doing over there. We're going to be taking a look at an overall cooling pattern, though, as we move through the coming weeks. That is the current expectation, not only from the National Weather Service, because when we transition from the 6 to 10 day outlook over to the 8 to 14 day outlook, it is going to change quite a bit. We also have a lot of model guidance suggesting that cold to even severely cold temperatures could be moving into the eastern and central United States for the midway point of the month, approximately. Also bringing about a more snowy pattern than what we saw in January. So maybe, just maybe, pretty cold on par with what we saw in January, if not a little bit less. It doesn't have to be that cold to be extremely cold, because we had a very, very cold January, but we're really seeing models dive into a very cold pattern. In addition to that, much snowier than what we saw in January. Other than that, if you're further south, more thunderstorm activity will prevail. I feel like genuinely from the deep south central states over to the Gulf states to the southeast, thunderstorms are going to be pretty abundant. And I looked over yesterday, don't ask me why I did this, but I was looking at every single Storm Prediction Center outlook over the whole course of the month of January. So I looked at it every single day, and there was like so many days with no outlooks. And it's normal to have, days in the wintertime where there's no thunderstorms expected, but it was like between 5 and 10, the amount of days where there was actually very small areas expecting thunderstorms. It was the least I've ever seen in an entire month. So expect a big uptick in that. So let's take a look here at the 6 to 10 day outlook here. And this is for January 7th through 11th. And we can see the flow that we've been expecting for a while now. Cold along the West Coast and also for areas in the northern plains and upper Midwest. During that time frame, we also see warmer temperatures prevailing from the south central states all the way into the southeastern states as well. Once we take a look at the precipitation, we can tell that there's going to be a lot of activity across the Rockies and from this deep south central area all the way up into the northeast and mid-Atlantic. And there is going to be quite a bit of potential in these areas during this time frame. Mostly the Northeast, Great Lakes, the Upper Midwest, and Northern Plains area in particular. Obviously, the Mountainous West is going to do phenomenal, so I kind of excluded them, but for the Rockies, Cascades, and Sierra Nevada mountains, they are going to see so much snowfall over the coming weeks. Let's take a look at the 8 to 14 day outlook, though, and I know that there's still a warm pocket over the southeast corridor, but we can tell that the cold is continuing to move further and further eastward here, even including the Northeast, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, Midwest areas, into the southern and central plains. All of these areas getting colder, and it looks like this is continuing to move eastward. Beyond this 9th through 15th time frame, the models continue to trend at that cold, reaching towards the entire east. But for this time frame, as we approach the midway point of the month, we can see a less impactful, but still very much so still there, southeast ridge is going to be occurring. Let's take a look here at the precipitation, though, and we do expect colder temperatures for a lot of these areas, but in addition to that, we get largely above average precipitation throughout these areas, so expect snowfall chances to increase to the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Great Lakes, Upper Midwest, Lower Midwest, the Plains. Obviously, the Mountainous West continuing to see snowfall, but these areas really should be watching out for an uptick in the overall snowfall chances as we approach the 10th through 15th time frame overall. Here is the past. Well, here's the one-day temperature anomalies. We're going to just start doing these all the time, but this is for today, February 1st, and we can see warmth is prevailing for 90% of the nation. We have some colder anomalies here near the southwest. It's kind of neutral, if anything. And then for northern North Dakota and Minnesota here, a little bit cooler. Also a little bit of Washington State, as well as Michigan perhaps, and Maine. But you really have to nitpick to find the cold. The warmth is glaringly obvious throughout the majority of the nation here, kind of descending as you head eastward, where we're seeing the warmer anomalies. But really, really warm in these areas here in particular. Been a pretty beautiful day, to say the least. And this is mostly going to be as of this morning, so it's hardly even the one-day outlook. I know it was a little cooler than this for most areas in the east, but this is only through the morning. We had a cold front roll through overnight. So tomorrow we'll move into the 2-day period, the next day the 3-day period, and then we have to wait a day because there is no 4-day option here. We have to wait till the 5-day and so on and so forth, and we'll move through it. But for now, this is the look. When we look at the European model, this is going to be your colder and snowier model of the two, which it's just tended to be actually throughout the entire wintertime, which is weird. Usually you see the GFS model being a little bit more bullish about snowstorms and cold in the long range, but that one has been a much more reserved, even when it shouldn't be. It's been more reserved when we've seen major cold eventually move in, which the European model nailed. The GFS model was hesitant to show, and we end up seeing something more like the European model. There has been times where the European model has also showed cold and it ends up being warmer, much like the GFS model. So it is still just a chance because of that overall discrepancy. But here's later on today, and we can see some snowfall in the mountainous west, as we mentioned earlier. Also the upper Midwest seeing some snowfall there. As we move towards tomorrow on Sunday the 2nd, we continue to see that mountainous snowfall. This is going to be a trend here, by the way, for the next couple of weeks. We do see a weak low over south central Canada, bringing some lighter snowfall to the Great Lakes and areas there in the northeast and kind of northern Ohio Valley, perhaps North Ohio, seeing some snowfall. As we move in towards Monday afternoon, that's going to be February 3rd, we do start to see this warmth making a bit of a comeback in the east. A little bit of a warmer day here. We do see it's equally warm in the southwest, though, so really you're ending up with a zonal flow, which means just the jet stream mostly moving directly west to east, not really dips or ridges or anything like that. But we do see this is overall further north than it should be. So this should bring an overall warmer pattern to most of the nation. Continued snowiness for the mountainous west. Great Lakes and upper Midwest also seeing some snowfall there. So kind of a very north-based pattern here for the first couple of days of February. Tuesday, we don't really change up too much. We do see what looks to be the beginning of a developing western trough, but zonal after that for the most part. So storms are kind of riding in now through more of the central west. We also see a low up here. So we get these two lows, and that's just going to bring precipitation and overall snowfall, especially if you're north of that jet stream. But really for the mountains, it's going to be everywhere. As we take a look at Wednesday the 5th, of February, what we see is a 993 millibar low pressure center developing over Nebraska, and we see some snowfall behind this thing. We see a lot of the mountains in northern plains seeing snowfall. Also, a little bit of a developing warm front out to the east, and we see ice along that warm front, snow to the north of it, and showers and thunderstorms underneath that warm front, which is pretty standard. We'll have to watch and see if we develop a cold front underneath it, which by Thursday we actually are going to. This is Thursday the 6th. This will be a very warm day for the east if this verifies. We have a warm front way, way up there near Canada. So this warm air, you can imagine, is getting pulled up the east coast here. Warm and humid, that is. Cold front dragging underneath and kind of tilting back towards the west. This is going to bring about thunderstorm possibilities for all of these areas along the cold front. So keep in mind, this is only possible because of that pooling of the warm and humidity up the east coast. So you might be thinking this is pretty unusual, but it's because of that warmth and humidity in place that brings about the possibility for thunderstorms as a whole. Again, going to kind of set it up here, but warm front, cold front look, and that is dragging the cold in. We know that when this cold moves into that warm and humid environment, we get that lifting, we get that instability, and that's kind of what's the driving force here. We'll have to see if we cool down after this point. There is still some storminess out west, but not the most in the world. We see by Friday, we do end up with a colder looking east overall after that cold front has gone ahead and moved through. The problem is that for a full-blown cool down, you don't want to see this, the storminess and the cold still over the west as well. So this is why we end up with a marginally cold look here for February 7th. Not deep Arctic cold, to say the least. We still see snowfall and cold out west. That is going to be more indicative of a negative PNA, which is going to make these major cooldowns a little bit harder to come by for the moment. Along the Gulf Coast, Probably still pretty warm and humid, and we're even seeing some isolated showers and thunderstorms popping up here, so that should be a telling of what we're seeing as far as the temperatures and everything. We do see a low move across as well by Saturday the 8th. A little bit weak, but we do see snowfall off to the north for areas in the plains, upper Midwest, Great Lakes here. And then we get this pocket again of potential showers, thunderstorms, all that stuff could be very, very possible here. And by this is going to be earlier on Sunday, but I think this frame kind of encompasses the overall look a little bit better. We get this low near Toronto, I would say. Warm front out to the east, another dragging cold front situation. So you once again get this warm, humid air kind of really pulled into the East Coast area. Another line of potential thunderstorms in here for these areas. And above this warm front, we do see snowfall here for the northeast, but likely what we're going to see is that rain snow line kind of track on to the north. So you might get some accumulation followed by some rain. Let's see what happens over the coming hours. And yeah, we start to mix over to rain in the northeast there. And then we do see that after the cold front has moved through, we maybe get some back end snowfall here for eastern Canada and the northeastern states, more particularly just New York and New England. We get some leftover residual thunderstorms and showers behind that cold front still around. And we do get a warm push up the west, and I think that's pretty massive in terms of the upcoming pattern, because if we get that warm push, it could be enough to really force the cold into the east, which could completely shake up the pattern. By that Monday afternoon, what we see is a zonal flow-ish, right? We don't see any major troughs or ridges, but the other one was way up here to the north. We're seeing hundreds of miles further south now zonal flow, so this one in particular should bring overall cooler temperature anomalies to the entire eastern United States without there being troughs or ridges. Let's take a look here at Tuesday on the 11th, and because of all that cold, we end up with a storm building nearby Oklahoma and Texas. We also see a low that is still around for the Rockies here. All this energy kind of coming together. Probably you get some southern flow from the Gulf, this northern flow from the northern jet, and it's all trying to come together over this central United States area, but we end up with heavy snowfall throughout portions of the Rockies, plains in particular, and regions of the Midwest as well. Thunderstorms and showers prevailing underneath for Texas and Oklahoma. We move forward a couple of hours. We see this low really start to develop here. Keep in mind, this is beyond 10 days out, which I told you guys yesterday, and I've been telling you guys forever, but when we're looking at this far out, we're looking for overall trends, not very specific. I will walk you through what the model's showing specifically, but don't take it as gospel. Take it as more of a overall what there's potential to see and really what the pattern supports. And, you know, we possibly do see storms like this. It's really just a question of, will it look exactly like this, and will it happen exactly at this time, and will it happen exactly right there? Those are the things that can shift a little bit, obviously. Our low now very close to the Mississippi River up there in the western areas of Tennessee and Kentucky. We see this northern snowfall now for a lot of the Midwest, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes area. Again, still a pretty decent thunderstorm and severe weather chance underneath this low. Cold is really diving in behind this system, so you have all the ingredients there. What we're going to see, though, is this low moves almost directly towards the north again. It cuts in. This is very common in La Niñas, so it makes sense that we're in a La Niña and we're seeing this type of pattern really begin to take hold of the overall pattern. We do see this warm, humid push up the east again. So how many times has this happened now at hours 270 on this model run? This is maybe the third or fourth one, and we're seeing just really, really bad rainstorms, thunderstorms because of this along the Gulf and southeast areas here. And also wintry weather up to the north. Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast seeing ice and snow by this point. Mostly ice for the Mid-Atlantic, snow for the Northeast. That's Wednesday the 12th. As we head overnight, that wintry weather continues. Some ice moving northward up into the Northeast. So that kind of dreaded snow with ice on top taking place here. We do see that we get a secondary low developing underneath. Again, don't take it as gospel, but we do see a low developing nearby the coast underneath with that cold front, which does happen sometimes. And we end up with this snowy area for more interior areas, mostly mountainous throughout New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee here. with rainfall on the eastern end of this. So a really interesting storm there taking fold again early on Thursday, the 13th. More major low pressure systems moving into the west, bringing about major snowfall once again for the Cascades, Rockies, and Sierra Nevada mountains. Meanwhile, I mean, really, when you look at the jet stream, it's a bit of a ridge over the west, and then this more major trough than we've seen on the models for February, really starting to take hold for Thursday the 13th. That storm on the east coast moves up into the northeast, bringing more snowfall to those areas. There is a pretty strong nor'easter, and we kind of stay in this eastern cold pattern. Some of our western snowstorms end up translating over to some plains and Midwest snowfall, even some Ohio Valley snowfall as well. We have more snowy really snowiness, but overall storminess here down the pipeline for that jet stream as well. Saturday here on the 15th, we end up with a low nearby New York and Pennsylvania. Some snowfall once again for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast areas. Very major Arctic invasion here. We see an Arctic area, really an Arctic air mass moving in through the upper Midwest and northern plains as they tend to do. But this is very reminiscent of what we saw throughout January, so I think it's really worth noting. This is a pretty severe look as far as cold goes, and keep in mind, previous model runs did exclude this feature, but it is interesting to see the models popping up with this, especially we were just mentioning either yesterday or the day before that long-range guidance looked a lot more like this. This is a deterministic model, obviously not a long-range model, and it's starting to hop on board to that idea. So we'll have to pay attention to the trends and see if it keeps showing something like this. I mean, we have a Mid-Atlantic and Northeast snowfall event. We have a Pacific Northwest snowfall event that's likely to wrap around the jet stream a little bit. And we have a deepening Arctic air mass there by the end of things here. By the next couple of frames, we're continuing to see Northeast snowfall there, and we're seeing a building positive P&A, the main feature we saw throughout a lot of December and January, building there, and this forces this cold deep into the heart of the eastern states. So really, really cold look here to end things off around February 16th. Lots of snowfall in many different areas. I mean, this is just an extreme look after this warm spell. Very, very interesting. GFS model, we're going to really see a lot less cold and snow. We will still see quite a bit, though, starting out for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic as early as Sunday and then Monday, just a couple days from now. We do see this overall warmer pattern prevail. We end up with a lot of these kind of snowstorms that just move straight from the northwest through the Midwest, Great Lakes, and into the Northeast, just like we saw in the European model. We get a deeper south one here around Tuesday the 11th, building for the southern or the central plains, kind of the lower Midwest, into the Mid-Atlantic. Ends up being a little bit of a warmer storm. Very similar one, just a little bit further northward, develops around the 13th here into the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. We get a third or fourth storm for that area here by Friday into Saturday the 14th, 15th. And then we're getting even more snowfall for the Northeast by Monday the 17th. But by the 17th on this model, we still have this zonal look. So not the super deep cold in the east. But we actually end up with a very similar amount of snowfall, actually, and maybe even more for the Mid-Atlantic and further south areas on this model versus the European one, which is interesting. You know, we don't have the amount of severe cold, but we almost end up with the same amount of snowfall, if not more, for some areas. Which goes to show, I talked about this in late January when we kind of knew that February would bring about some warmer temperatures. It's hard to imagine, but the little bit less cold pattern actually is a little bit more supportive of snowfall. And I know that's a hard idea to grasp sometimes, but it could be too cold for snow. That's how a lot of January went. February, unless we get what the European model is showing for, doesn't look too cold for snow at all, and it actually could lead to more snowfall than January brought about. Total precipitation on the European model here, lots for the mountainous west, lots for the east in general. Very, very positive look if you're hoping for precipitation. And when we look at the anomalies, we see at least half of the nation in the above average category, if not, I would say 60 to even 75% of the nation in the above average precipitation category. Below average, mostly if you're in the south or very far northwest. But keep in mind, these areas average so much that you can get a ton of precipitation and it's still below their average. So this does not mean necessarily dry up there. This is just, you know, 9 inches instead of 10. So keep that in mind. I think that's a good way to put it. Total precipitation on the European model is incredible. We see the mountainous west, as we've been expecting, is in the multiple feet category. But something new is we're seeing the Midwest and plains here, as well as the Great Lakes, in the multiple feet category, and even the Northeast states, especially northern New England, in multiple feet. We do end up with snowfall in general. It's not feet in feet, but we do see the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic also getting some snowfall in there. Your GFS model is going to look like a little bit less for these northern areas here. Still 1 to 2 feet throughout most of these regions. But we do end up with, 6 to 10 to even 15 inches throughout this Ohio Valley area, even Midwest areas, into the Mid-Atlantic. So a little bit more in the south on the GFS model, like we mentioned. Mountainous West, really the same thing on either model. It's almost a fact that they are going to see just a walloping of snowfall. Your temperature pattern on the European model is going to be up and down here for a while. We're not going to dive into it too much because it's just going to be back and forth between cold and warm. We can almost see that. Watch this flow. You can really see the cold air move in and this warm blast up the east when we get these warm fronts moving through. I'm going to leave that drawing on screen. Just watch this play out. Warm up the east, cool down moves through. Warm up the east, cool down comes through. Warm up the east, cool down comes through. Warm up the east. That one was hard to come by. And then really cold temperatures move in. It's almost like watching a heartbeat. That was just crazy looking. It was like stuck in a loop. But then right around the 13th, 14th, we end up with this deep Arctic air mass in the east. And the reason I think we're getting this on this model is, for one thing, obviously we're getting some sort of polar vortex split going on where we're getting a lot of that Arctic air moving way lower down into North America. That, coupled with a developing positive PNA, which is by far the most important teleconnection this winter that we have seen take place, and oftentimes it is the biggest, at least short term. If you're excluding the ENSO, which is your El Nino and La Nina, I think PNA is going to be one of, if not your most impactful teleconnections left. So we see this warm up out west, and immediately it's like the floodgates open and the Arctic air is allowed to just pour into the east. And that's what we saw a lot of, again, in December and January. This actually gets worse for the east as we see those purples and pinks move in. The warm up really expands for the west. So we really do get a developing positive PNA here, which would maybe point towards more long-term cold after the midway point of February. But again, this is the first model run to really show this, and it could be gone by tomorrow, but the long-range guidance has been suggesting this for a while now. So it might flip-flop a little bit, but I do suspect that we will see some sort of cold air around the midway point of this month. And by the way, this is severely below normal. We're seeing magentas there, bright pinks throughout many different states. And that's 25, 35 degrees or even more below normal. This is severe. This does remind me of what we saw the January cooldown look like in the long range. And it did kind of become a little bit milder than what we originally saw. So don't be surprised if this does continue to be a trend. If we see some of these brighter pinks turn into more of the darker magentas and we kind of back off a good 5 or 10 degrees, which doesn't really matter when you're talking about like 35 degrees below normal. I don't think anybody's going to be like, oh, thank God it's only 25 degrees below normal today and not 35. It's going to be a technicality almost. It's not really going to matter. But we could see these models back off on this cold a little bit if this continues to be the look. But really, really impressive stuff. The GFS model, I mean, we get this same like heartbeat look where it's just stuck in a loop of the cold air, warm air, cold air, back and forth. And then we do end up with colder times, like around the 14th, 15th, we do end up with a colder period, but it's not really sufficient. We continue to see the warm air win. The cold air stays bottled up for the north central and northwestern states, and we don't end up with as cold of a pattern by any means. It's not even close to the European model, so there is still some disagreement there as well. With all that being said, models currently show, to kind of recap, much colder conditions for the kind of like 13th, 14th, and beyond of February. Much snowier conditions, not only after that point where we get the cold, but also before. For a lot of the northern states, we do see a lot of snowfall coming up. So just snowier and colder, to say the least. With all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. We upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.